Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing, oh, I suppose it's a build request. I've been asked a few times in the past to do a build themed around a ninja. Now, but the thing is with this is every time I got asked to do a ninja, I got asked to do a different kind. Some people asked for more traditional ninjas, basically something that is a bit more historically accurate, and others have asked me to do ninjas from anime like Naruto, or more specifically I think someone asked for the ninja from One Punch Man, whose name is escaping me right now. Something about speed. Anyways, so I was like, okay, well, I mean, I can do something a bit more closer to traditional, but kind of getting like some of those kind of anime and more like superpower-esque things, because after all, this is Dungeons and Dragons or Baldur's Gate, so it makes sense to get a little bit of the fantastical. Now, I had a lot of things I wanted to achieve with this build, namely, I obviously wanted to be fast, I wanted to be able to use a katana quite effectively, because, you know, it makes sense, and I also wanted to get some of the kind of like iconic abilities that ninjas in fiction get, such as being able to, you know, summon clones of yourself, be able to, like, I don't know, what's a good way of putting it? Be able to use like different kinds of like gear, such as shurikens and smoke bombs, all that sort of thing. So in the end, I came up with something that's a little bit haphazard, but does turn into quite a powerful build that gets the job done, and overall feels really, really fun to play, although you will kind of have to choose what you want to prioritize getting first. I'll be showing what I would like to get in what order, for the most part, but it is up to you if you want to pick up certain abilities sooner or later. And luckily for this build, the leveling is quite free. It doesn't matter kind of which class you take in which order, you're still going to be getting pretty much everything anyway, but my personal way of doing it is just kind of how I would do it, but it's entirely up to you if you wanted to level this up a different way, if you wanted to give it a try. So, let's get into the build. We're actually going to be kicking things off as a ranger, and spoiler alert, there is no rogue levels in this build. And I'll quickly get into why. Obviously, the main reason you'd be going for a ninja is like, for going for rogue with a ninja build, you'd be like, oh, we want, you know, stealth and we want sneak attacks because that's what ninjas were about. But actually, that's not always true. Yes, their main thing was infiltration and espionage, and eventually, you know, taking down high-profile targets, but they never actually went for, like, well, they definitely did go for, like, stealthy kills, but a lot of ninjas would actually do one-on-one combat with katanas, just using less than honourable tactics to get the victory, such as using things like shurikens, or maybe even putting certain, like, blinding powder in their scabbards, so that when they sheath their katanas, they get that dust everywhere and it blinds their opponents, things like that. So I decided, and besides, since the longsword is not a finesse weapon, in this case our katana, we would not be able to sneak attack with it anyway, so rogue was actually somewhat pointless. The only thing you'd be getting out of it is the mobility with a bonus action dash, but we can get that in other ways if we so choose, and we can get pretty much everything else we would want from this from other classes. So that's why I've decided not to go with rogue on this occasion, and like I said, we're starting with ranger. With Ranger, that's going to get us a couple of things. Number one, a favoured enemy, and I'm going to go with Bounty Hunter. This is so if you want to, you can pick up Ensnaring Strike to be able to kind of entangle enemies, but we also gain proficiency in Investigation, which for someone who is good at espionage feels appropriate, but in reality you can actually take any of these. It's not going to really affect the build a whole lot. However, in my opinion, I think Bounty Hunter does make the most sense. And for Natural Explorer, I am going to do a bit of a weird pick. I want Beast Tamer, because I believe in some fiction there are quite a few ninjas who kind of have animal companions or familiars of a kind, and as such Beast Tamer allowing us to have fine familiar is going to work out quite nicely, especially the crow familiar, and by having a familiar we can kind of have them scout ahead and infiltrate and like kind of, you know, scope things out for us before we head in, be able to assist us in combat with a few minor abilities. They often won't last long in combat, but you never know, and overall it's just going to create a lot of kind of fun roleplay opportunities and has a good dollop of utility, and I really liked it for this build. Again, the all-black crow pairs quite nicely with the ninja here. As for our ability scores, they're going to look a little bit strange, but bear with me here. Strength is at 17, and I am making this kind of a strength-based character. Namely because strength affects quite a few things that would actually help this build, but namely it also helps with the ninja's mobility, because obviously the big thing about a ninja is being able to infiltrate places by being quite athletic and being able to, you know, jump quite high, jump across things, climb up things, all that good stuff. And having a high strength score, it gives us a greater jump height, so we absolutely want to pick this up. We're also going to be using the Potion of Everlasting Vigor to bump this up to a 19, and we're going to be bumping it up to a 20 with a half feat later. You probably already know the one. Dexterity is at 8 because we are using the Gloves of Dexterity with this build to bump this up to an 18 because we needed a little bit of help with our ability scores in this build. Constitution is at 14. I would like this higher, and technically you could bump it up to a 15 for that little bit of extra HP, but unfortunately it's not really going to help with our saving throws so much, so I feel like putting it at 14 works fine. Intelligence is at 8, we don't need it. Wisdom at 16, as it's going to be quite important. It's going to be our main spellcasting modifier, as well as help us out with our unarmored defense, because if you didn't think I was taking Monk with this build, you are sorely mistaken. And finally, a 10 in Charisma, so that our deception skill isn't too bad. Again, ninjas would have to be quite deceptive, and I'll get more into that later. Now, again, from here on out, you can kind of take the levels in whatever you like. I mean, another reason we took Ranger first was to kind of get the armor and weapon proficiencies, namely the longsword proficiency with martial weapons. So you could dip straight out of this into our main class if you want, but I'll quickly show off what you can get with level 2 of Ranger. At level 2 of Ranger, you're going to get a couple of spells, and really this is a pick your favourite situation because a lot of these would be on theme. We are using a bow with this build, so Hail of Thorns might be nice. Ensnaring Strike would work well with Bounty Hunter if you wanted to grab it. Speak with Animals could work, but it's not necessarily on theme for this build. Hunter's Mark would be really good on this build and would help out with damage, but we do have other concentration options that we might want to use over this. So I'm going to go for Enhanced Leap to start. Again, a big thing about the ninjas is being able to infiltrate and being able to basically get up any surface, climb and jump, so Enhanced Leap helps with that. And again, when we have high strength like this, combining it with Enhanced Leap is going to create some fun results, and I think I will take Hunter's Mark because that's what I kind of used for testing, but really any of the kind of combat stuff, even Longstrider, would work really nicely with this build, and it's just a nice little extra bit of utility. But we're also going to get a fighting style. Now unfortunately we are using a longsword two-handed here, so dueling isn't really going to work for us. You could equip a shield if you'd like, but then you'd lose unarmored defense, blah 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 blah, and so it does kind of suck that we don't have great weapon fighting here. So we'll take the next best thing, which is archery, since we are using a bow with this build, because ninjas did use bows quite a lot as well, maybe as much as they use their swords. Now we're going to hop into our main class for this build. Yeah, I know, we're not actually taking Gloomstalker. I initially did conceive this build with Gloomstalker in mind, and if you wanted to drop a level sacrificing a feat for a 3rd level in Ranger and taking 3 levels in a different class later, you absolutely can. This would get you things like Dread Ambusher, Superior Dark Vision, the ability to hide is a bonus action, but we're going to be getting that already, an Umbral Shard, which again, we're kind of going to be getting anyway as well, and also Disguise Self, which we're also going to be getting anyway. Do you see why I dropped Gloomstalker? The only thing you'd be getting is that +3 bonus to your initiative and that extra attack at the start of combat, with a bit of movement speed, which, yes, would be perfect for a ninja, and you can still absolutely get it if you want. Hell, maybe take this now and respec when you get to later levels, but for now, I kind of wanted stuff from other classes more, and you'll see why. So, let's go back and multi-class into our main class here. Monk. Like I said, you saw it coming. I mean, it makes so much sense to use Monk for a build like this. Although I did have less of a focus on the overall unarmed combat side of things, but, you know, sticking in theme with kind of like fictional ninjas, it does make sense to pick it up. This is going to give us a bunch of things that we need, like unarmored defense, the ability to use dexterity for our monk weapons, which we're not actually going to be doing here since we will have 20 strength. And, of course, we'll also be able to get our unarmed attacks as a bonus action, so we get all the good stuff that we want from Monk to give us a bunch of versatility. At Monk level 2, we're going to be getting some more unarmored movement, which we want, as well as our patient defense and Step of the Wind, dash and disengage. So yes, we can dash as a bonus action now anyway, even though it costs a key point, which we really don't like, so I'll be providing an alternative later. But patient defense is also really nice, and will actually synergize with some equipment that we're going to be getting later. At Monk level 3, we get to pick our subclass, and, well, you can use any of them, but I think the one I want to get is pretty obvious. Way of Shadow. Way of the Open Hand would work really nicely for this as well if you wanted to go for a more traditional historical ninja rather than something that's got superpowers, but I quite like Way of the Shadow here. Way of the Shadow is going to give us a bunch of things like the ability to hide as a bonus action, which, you know, Rogue would have given us, but we can get it here anyway. Pass Without Trace to make our whole team stealthy, which is quite nice. Darkness, which is going to be super important for this build's playstyle. Dark Vision. And Silence, which can actually work in our favour for stealthy kills and to silence spellcasters, which we really want. And as well, we also get Minor Illusion, allowing us to lure out certain enemies and pick them off one by one like a true stealthy character would. Overall, everything we get here is stuff we seriously want for this build. At Monk level 4, we are going to get a couple of cool things, namely Slow Fall, which will allow us to gain resistance to falling damage, so that works out pretty nicely for us actually. And of course, we also get an ability score improvement or feat, and I am taking Tavern Brawler, as you obviously saw coming. This is going to allow us to bump our strength up to an even number, meaning that we'll have a total of 20, probably by this point, with the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, allowing us to basically have a very, very high unarmed damage attack modifier, because our strength modifier is added twice to the damage and attack rolls of unarmed strikes, improvised weapons, or throwing attacks. This also works if you wanted to throw shurikens, so say you keep a bunch of daggers in your inventory, you can now throw them over and over again, dealing a ton of extra damage. That's kind of how we're going to be using shurikens, because unfortunately darts were cut from the game, which is absolutely what I would have used instead otherwise. But of course, there's also things like javelins and spears you could throw if you kind of don't care what you're throwing, you just want to throw something powerful, but daggers would make the most sense if you're trying to replicate shurikens. So Tavern Brawler works out pretty nicely here for all of the stuff we're looking for. At Monk level 5, we're finally going to be getting extra attack. Now, yes, this was delayed by a couple of levels, but it's not as big a deal when you've got a lot of Monk levels, because you're still getting those bonus action attacks anyway, so it's going to feel like you've got extra attack regardless, especially when your unarmed strikes are probably even more powerful than your weapon attacks at this point because it's Tavern Brawler. So, you know, this doesn't hurt as much getting it at a slightly later level. We're also going to be getting Stunning Strike with both our weapon and melee attacks, basically allowing us to possibly stun the target, rendering them immobile. So, you know, that can also work quite nicely. And we also get Cloak of Shadows, allowing us to become invisible if we are obscured. Yes, Gloomstalker does get this earlier, being at level 3 rather than level 5, but, you know, the fact that we still get it either way, and it's not exactly the most compelling ability in the world, you know, it's fine, we get it either way. At Monk level 6, we are going to get our final Monk features that we want. Our damage die for our attacks is going to go up, I believe, and also we're going to be getting things like unarmored movement increased, so, you know, more movement speed, makes sense for a ninja. Also, our unarmed attacks now count as magical for overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical damage, which is great. That means we're going to have a pretty solid option to get around those resistances. And finally, Shadow Step, our own little shadowy teleport, allowing us to teleport between lightly obscured and heavily obscured areas. Unfortunately, if we're standing in pure light, this won't work. However, in a lot of indoor environments especially, this won't be so much of an issue. And after you teleport, you'll have advantage on your next melee attack roll, which is awesome. I'm surprised I haven't done a rogue Shadow Monk build, like a thief, thief rogue works perfectly for monks anyway, but Shadow Monk can really take advantage on getting those extra sneak attacks, so I might actually do that a split 6-6 with like daggers or short swords and kind of go for that, because I think that could be really powerful mixing it with Shadow Step. Although I've just realised it's literally the edgelord nothing personnel kid build, because you teleport behind an enemy and stab him. Why don't I like talk myself into things and immediately talk myself out of them? I don't know. Let's just keep going. Where's my mouse? There it is. Now, we're going to be multi-classing again, but this is totally optional. Again, this build is rather free-form, and again, you could have taken these levels earlier instead. Maybe if you didn't care about the Ranger levels, you could have gone for Monk and then go for this. Maybe tack the Ranger on the end if you care, if you don't want it, or you could have said, screw the Ranger, I don't care about the stuff you said, we'll get Fighter and get Action Surge. Any of this will work. You just kind of have to pick and choose what you like. This was just something that got me kind of all of the things that I wanted thematically. And again, it's just nice to change things up again. I haven't done anything with Ranger in a long time, so I need to do another dedicated Ranger build. That'll come in the future. But anyways, let's get into our final multiclass here. Cleric. which feels like the antithesis to everything we've been working up to at this point. Clerics are all about radiance and light and, good times for the most part, as opposed to our shadowy monk ability. So why go for Cleric? Well, it's going to give us a few things that we want, but let's get into some cantrips first, and I think we're just going to take the conversation stuff here. We don't really need Produce Flame or Sacred Flame here. They kind of go against what we're going for, although Produce Flame might look cool because it's, again, blue flame. If you've not seen that video, go watch it. But, we get Thaumaturgy, Guidance, and Resistance here, which, are great. And then our subclass, the Trickery Domain, which is going to give us a ton of stuff that we really, really like. Namely, Blessing of the Trickster, grant another creature advantage on stealth checks. Unfortunately, this costs our concentration and is kind of basically a worse version of Pass Without Trace for us, which we already have, so this isn't really that important. But we do also get Charm Person, which could have some uses, and Disguise Self. Now, believe it or not, Disguise Self really works great with historical ninjas, because they were kind of known less for wearing this all black, kind of look like fiction which would kind of determine, but actually just disguising themselves as regular everyday people and blending into crowds and societies that way before going for the kill. So actually having a disguise self spell where, we could disguise ourselves as regular people and mill about before striking and revealing our true form makes total sense here. So actually picking up disguise self was kind of a requirement for this build. Now as for our deity, I can't really say who would work well as a ninja deity. Again, I'm not an expert on the deities of D&D just off my head, but hey, I am learning. Ilmata, no, does not work. Kalemvor, I think, is the one that I'm thinking of. I quite like the lore for this and kind of like mixing the lore of Kalemvor with this kind of ninja character, because they are fair but distant. Kalemvor guides the dead to their appropriate plane in the afterlife. His clergy provides last rites across Faerun, but also destroy undead that escape Kalemvor's judgment. I feel like this guy is kind of like a merchant of death. Perhaps he does kind of, take on contract work, or, works for powerful people in Baldur's Gate, kind of like the ninjas would have worked for the feudal lords. And as such, but he kind of sees it as sort of like he's passing righteous judgment and deciding who should die and like who should live and such like that. I don't know, maybe something along those lines, but something like, I don't know, hell? No, probably not. You guys will have to think of this one on your own. I'll go with Kalemvor for now. And we also do get some spells, but again, not a lot of them really fit the build, but there are some useful utility options here. Sanctuary obviously is one of the better spells you can grab, especially if you need to kind of get away and reposition yourself. Inflict Wounds, I feel like necrotic damage works for this build, it kind of fits in. And we'll go for Command, because that has some uses, like being able to make your enemies drop their weapons. Like, you can kind of flavour that as like the tricks of the ninjas, where they would like do various things to kind of disable their opponents, like disarming them and such. Command could work like that. And Bane, I don't know. I don't really want to take healing spells with this build, but you can kind of play around with it. Next up at Cleric level 2, we're going to get what we're really here for. Our Channel Oath ability, Invoke Duplicity. Distract your enemies with illusion that looks exactly like yourself, so this is kind of like the shadow clone thing. Within 3 meters of the illusion, attack rolls have advantage for you and your allies. Both the attacker and the creature must be within 3 meters. Basically, this is a way to secure advantage and basically be able to kind of crit fish a little bit with a higher chance to crit, so we can get these bigger damage numbers off, but it also fits perfectly in theme. Again, how ninjas kind of will create that like shadow clone thing that turns into a log when it's hit or something, you know what I mean. I've seen like the first 20 or so episodes of Naruto. I'm basically an expert on the series. Anyways, again, we get an extra spell slot here, and you can put it into whatever you like. Spell slot? Spell. What if it's not a spell slot? What would you call it? A prepared spell square? Oh. Anyways, at level 3 of Cleric, we're going to get some Trickery Domain spells, including 2 that I really, really wanted. We already have Pass Without Trace, but getting an alternate version of it that doesn't use our key points is quite nice. And Mirror Image, allowing us to summon 3 illusory duplicates of ourselves, each increasing our armor class by 3. Every time an attacker misses us, one of these duplicates disappears. I think it's perfectly on theme for this build, and getting it through a wisdom-based caster as well is nice. But we also get a ton of level 2 spells that I actually really, really want for this build. Namely, Hold Person, Silence, and Blindness. Hold Person and I think Blindness fit perfectly for this build, and we already get Silence anyway, but again, getting a version of it that doesn't use our key points is very, very welcome. We can also get things like Enhanced Ability to give us a bump to all of our checks if we so choose, and we'll keep Sanctuary and Inflict Wounds. Now, again, you can play around with this level. Obviously, I kind of want the extra feat here because we're a little bit multi-ability score dependent here. But again, you could go for that third level of this for Ranger for Gloomstalker if you want. Maybe take it up another level of Monk to be able to grab Stillness of Mind and an extra key point. But I'm going to be personally going with level 4 of Cleric for the feat. We do also get a cantrip here, so I'll pick up Produce Flame. And finally, we are going to take an ability score improvement and bump up our wisdom to a nice solid 18, giving us a pretty well-rounded stat score. If you care less about the spellcasting, you can bump up your constitution if you like, but I definitely want that higher wisdom. And that is the build. Overall, you're going to be able to get a lot out of this build. You're going to get a pretty solid amount of damage between your main weapon attacks and your unarmed strikes being buffed by Tavern Brawler. You're going to get a ton of utility, being able to be extremely maneuverable across the map, make it extremely hard for enemies to hit you through our various AC sacking buffs, and things like Darkness as well, because, that's a pretty powerful spell for us. And also be able to debilitate your foes with things like Stunning Strike, Silence, Blindness, Hold Person. You've got a ton of really cool things here to work with, and I think it creates a really interesting and unique playstyle. And again, you can kind of play this as a bit of a solo build, being able to kind of infiltrate places using your familiar to scout ahead, and then being able to take enemies out one by one and teleport around the battlefield. But again, this build does also work quite well as a frontline fighter, with your main fighting skills being with your weapon and your unarmed strikes, being able to deal big chunks of damage, as you'll see in the combat footage later. But for now, let's get into the equipment. First up, let's go over the main weapon here, and it's the Katana, which is kind of an elephant in the room type situation. The Katana is a +1 longsword, and that's pretty much it. And unfortunately, it is also only obtained in Act 3, but any weapon you pick up, you could dual-wield daggers if you wanted to kind of do something like kunai, or whatever, until you get this thing. But once you get it, the build's look is kind of complete. But you're definitely going to want to maybe buff this sort of thing with the Drake Throat Glaive, giving it an extra +1, making it a +2 weapon, and an extra d4 of a damage of your choice. I would personally choose Acid, because, ninjas probably did coat their blades in, like, poison or something, and while we don't get poison damage from the Drake Throat Glaive, we can get Acid, which is the next best thing, or Thunder, if you just want a bit more oomph without changing the look of the weapon too much. But as for our other weapon, we have the Titan String Bow. This weapon deals additional damage equal to your strength modifier. It's a +1 bow, but again, maybe if you use the Drake Throat Glaive and got a sorcerer to twin cast this buff on both your bow and your katana, they'd both become +2 weapons with a bit of extra damage, and that's probably what I would do. But the Titan String Bow is super strong for this build, because it deals additional damage equal to our strength modifier. Basically, it uses both our dex and our strength, and with 20 dex and 20 strength and 18 dex, this thing is going to do a lot of damage. Would it do more damage if we got Sharpshooter? Yes, and I do intend to fully make a Sharpshooter build with the Titan String Bow sometime in the future. I've kind of done other builds like it with my Glacial Archer, but I really do want to kind of see what the true potential of this weapon can hold, so stick around for that in either the near or very far future. Who knows with me at this point. But anyways, these two weapons are going to round out our kit quite nicely. So let's get into the equipment. I have the Mask of Soul Perception here, giving us a +2 bonus to attack rolls, initiative rolls, and perception checks. That all feels pretty on theme for a ninja, as well as giving us detect thoughts as well. But this is kind of a throwaway slot. I originally had the Covert Cowl in this slot because it would reduce our critical hit rate, it would reduce our critical hit threshold down to a 19 whenever we are obscured, which fit perfectly for this build, but unfortunately it's light armor, so it cancelled out unarmored defense, so I went with this instead. But any non-armor, so any non-light or medium headpiece will work perfectly here, so pick whatever you like kind of as you go throughout the game, but this Mask of Soul Perception is kind of what you want to aim for. Also, if you really wanted to stretch it, it kind of looks like it could be a ninja mask. But not really, so I'm going to hide it. Our armor is the Garb of Land and Sky. It was kind of hard to find a kind of like a martial robe that looked good in this game and was also quite functional, so the Garb of the Land and Sky works really well here. While using Patient Defense, you also gain the effect of Blade Ward, making you resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And while using Step of the Wind, your next attack roll has advantage and deals an extra 1d8 force damage, and has an armor class of +1. Overall, this is a really solid set, but again, it's Act 3 exclusive. So if you wanted to grab something that kind of looks similar in the earlier game, you could pick up, I believe it is the Armour of uninhibited Kashigo. But in order to do that, you'd have to give up the Boots of Speed, which I think is going to be a solid Act 1 option for you. So you might want to kind of play around with the look of this build, maybe go for less of a black ninja look and more of a like average everyday citizen look with the camp clothing instead, and kind of play around with a different sort of armor set that isn't really trying to be fashionable in the main slot, but again, play around with this as you like. Next up is the Gloves of Dexterity. As always, this is going to give us a 18 to our Dexterity score, and it's obtainable really, really early on in the game before Act 2, and as such, it's one of the best items in the game by far. And finally, we have our Boots, the Boots of the Uninhibited Kashigo. Again, this is Act 3, but I've provided an Act 1 alternative. The wearer deals additional modifier with their unarmed strikes equal to their Wisdom modifier, so you get an additional bit of damage equal to your Wisdom, which for us is pretty high, so it's going to bump up our unarmed strikes even more. But in the meantime, you can use the Boots of Speed to get that bonus action dash, which again, you kind of missed from Rogue, and heck, you might prefer this over that little bit of extra damage for the maneuverability. It's entirely up to you. But also you could use something like the Disintegrating Nightwalkers as well, if you want that kind of teleporting ability of like Misty Step. So it's entirely up to you, but I kind of preferred the Boots of Speed more for this build. Speaking of Misty Step though, we have the Amulet of Misty Step, allowing us to cast Misty Step once per short rest. It's just a fail-safe teleport if for some reason Shadow Step is unable to be used if we're in like a clear area. So if you desperately need that teleport in order to position yourself, you can still get it regardless, but swap this out for whatever you like. But next up is kind of mandatory, the Eversight Ring. The wearer cannot be blinded. You know, I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh player, and there's a very simple rule in it's kind of a simple, like, ethos in Yu-Gi-Oh, where the shorter a card's description is, usually the more powerful it is. In the case of the most powerful card in the game, Pot of Greed, allowing you to draw 2 cards, which completely breaks the game. So, the wearer cannot be blinded. That very short description leads to a very powerful effect. This means we don't need to take Warlock levels in order to be able to make use of Darkness to its fullest potential, whether we use Darkness in melee combat as a bit of a smoke bomb in order to be able to basically gain advantage on all attacks made on all attacks made against people within the Darkness, or we can teleport away using Shadow Step, cast Darkness around ourselves, and then, you know, just fire arrows out of it, like just like a machine gun, and have nothing be able to hit us back in return because they can't see us. It's an extremely powerful combo. I mean, it's one of Warlock's bread and butter kind of combos to go for Devil Sight and Darkness, but the ring will allow any class that can use Darkness to be able to use this strategy without taking Warlock levels. I can't believe I overlooked this until now. Definitely want to pick this up. It's an Act 2 option as well that you can obtain pretty early on if you know where to go, so I think it works out really nicely. It's a really powerful option for this build. And finally, the Shapeshifter's Boom Ring. This is kind of a throwaway slot that I'm kind of just using as like a lore, like, you know, roleplay thing. Because if we're going to be using Disguise Self a lot, we might as well gain a bonus to all checks while shapeshifting. Makes sense. I quite like it here. And like I said before, we have the Boots of Speed and the Drakethroat Glaive here. Nothing's really changed there in the past 2 minutes. I don't even know why I'm bringing it up. I'm all over the place today. It's been a long day, and I'm tired. So yeah, that is everything, I believe. Long story short, as I said, this is a very versatile build. It comes packed with a lot of damage and works quite well as a frontline fighter, with a ton of unique abilities like being able to teleport, cast Darkness, be able to make clothes of yourself, basically give yourself advantage in many different ways to fish for those really high damage numbers. And again, thanks to things like Tavern, Brawler, you're going to be dealing out a ton of damage per turn. Your Katana's going to do good damage, your bow is going to do pretty amazing damage, and your unarmed strikes with Flurry of Blows and your bonus action unarmed strike are just going to do great for you. And again, you can play this as a frontline fighter who is in the midst of combat with a full party, or someone who scouts ahead solo using their familiar to sneak in and deal tons of damage. Either way you play this build, you're going to have a fun time, and it is going to feel like a ninja. As I said, you are going to have to pick and choose what you want first, or if you even want to get certain things at all. I would maybe drop the Cleric levels and go for Rogue levels instead, if you want to kind of get that bit more of maneuverability, and also be able to get things like a second bonus action with Thief, if you don't care about things like Invoke Duplicity or Mirror Image or any of that other stuff. You can drop the Ranger levels for Fighter levels to get Action Surge if you want that bit more of burst damage, if you don't care about things like Fire Familiar or Enhanced Leap. I mean, there is a ton of stuff you can kind of mix and match with this build, but I definitely think that level 6 Shadow Monk core mixed with 2 levels of a kind of martial class like Fighter or Ranger or something like that really do this build quite well. And I mean, I even considered throwing Druid into the mix, because Druid gets... Because I was going to go, like, I originally actually envisioned this build as a Gloomstalker Ranger, Circle of the Land Druid, kind of making use of darkness that way, but also using the ability to turn into, like, you know, like, minor things like crows and cats to be able to infiltrate things. But that didn't feel very ninja-y, so I'm going to leave that for another build. Gloomstalker Ranger Druid, I think, is something I could really play around with. So let me know if you want to see that one. But yeah, I mean, I think this build is going to work out pretty nicely overall, like I said, and I really do hope you enjoy it if you try it out. Because like I said, are you just watching these videos to actually play these builds, or do you just want to absorb information? I got... somebody pointed out that last time in the comments. I thought it was quite funny that somebody kind of, you know, acknowledged these stupid things that I say randomly at different points of videos. As for, like, kind of channel update stuff, a couple of things to go over. My build from Monday, which at the time of this recording was yesterday, did extremely well. The Godslayer Blade, and I need to let you in on a secret. I knew that build would do well. I mean, here's the thing. I've kind of learned the ticks and trends that come with making my videos now. I know what certain topics and certain ways of framing things are gonna make the algorithm tick and get a lot of attention. Basically, a little bit of edginess. I mean, it's literally called the Godslayer Blade. I mean, the thumbnail said the gods have been deemed unworthy. I mean, of course, that's going to get, you know, attention from the people who kind of like that slightly edgier content. Also, I mean, it's a power build. I literally put +7 weapon in the title. I mean, of course, that's going to raise some eyebrows. I don't usually power build, so seeing that coming from me might have gotten some attention. And overall, I just think the lore and the theming were really, really interesting, and it seemed like people seemed to agree. So I'm really glad that everyone enjoyed that build. I was super, super happy to work on it. It's one of my favourites in recent memory, but it still wasn't enough to beat the anomaly that was the Reaper. It briefly overtook it as the 1 out of 10 video, where it kind of overtook that video's initial growth, but then that video's kind of second wind that it got steamed ahead. I'll never understand how the Reaper got so popular. That's one of the biggest anomalies on my channel, because it's by far the fastest growing video, and I have no idea how. But yeah, as for other stuff, obviously this is the Wednesday build. On Friday, you're going to be getting the next deity build, which is going to be Bahamut, which I'm sure everyone is going to be looking forward to. And then this weekend, it's a little bit up in the air whether or not I'm going to be able to stream. If I am going to be streaming, it's going to be on the Saturday, because that will be my only free day, because on the Sunday, I am helping a friend of mine move, so it's gonna take, so on that day I'm gonna be completely out of it anyway. But with Saturday, it's whether or not something else takes up my schedule. I'm not entirely sure that I might be able to stream. I don't know, it depends on how busy I am that day. I don't know yet. I'll let you know, but keep an eye out on the community tab if I haven't posted something already for an update there, but the likelihood is at the moment that I'm probably not going to be able to stream this weekend. In contrast to that, however, I've got the entire next week off of work, so I might even try some like experimental surprise streams if people are able to come to them, maybe some streams at slightly different times. I might just do some weird stuff with the channel over that time, if I feel like it. So, I don't know, we'll see what happens. Nothing might come of it. I might just play Power World all week. Because as much as that game has its controversies, it's very, very good. Anyways, I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.